Now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Cammack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll jump right in. So this question has already been posed by one of my colleagues, but I want to follow up on this. It is about the GAO report, which cites the sampling effort in China that was aimed at tracing the origin of the two pandemic pathogens. Now, there was a database of 17,500 animal samples. It was said, and I think it was you, Dr. Parker, that said you weren't familiar with that report. It is page 15, last sentence, second paragraph. This states that 17,500 animal samples were used, and not one had a closely related trigger to coronavirus. I'm not a scientist, so educate me. How many animal samples would it take? Because what we're hearing today, to the point that my colleague from Texas is saying, is that this is now something from a wet lab, contrary to everything that we've been briefed on for the last 2 years.
Well, I think animal samples doesn't tell me what genomic samples are in those animal samples. I think that must be referring to the September database that went offline, perhaps. I don't know. But just because they're animal samples or clinical samples, whether they be fecal, oral, tissue samples, doesn't tell me what genomic samples were identified in there. But I think, so that.
And because we're short on time, I'm going to jump to the next one. This is for really the panel at large. How much money is invested in research projects, either in China or in collaboration with Chinese researchers? Who is responsible for tracking this research? And to the comment that was made earlier about critical communication between scientists and researchers, how do we protect United States data, health data, and populations, particularly when the Chinese government at the highest levels is suppressing information, withholding information, even to the WHO in the middle of a pandemic? Don't all jump in at once.
I do not know how much U.S. dollars is going into research at China. I'm sorry.
Okay, Dr. Parker?
Yeah, I don't know that number either, but I think that's a number that should be asked of the federal funding agencies that work there.
Dr. George?
I think that whoever's taking a look at China's bioeconomy probably has more information about that. But I also think that on the point of the role of the Chinese federal government and what they're doing, it's not just about denial of information and sharing with other people. Let's not forget they are looking for genetic information from a whole lot of people all throughout the world with some very popular genetic tests. I think we need to broaden our awareness, and we need somebody to be paying attention to all of this.
Thank you, Dr. George.
Yeah, and the really fair questions. I unfortunately don't know the funding level for the Chinese science enterprise. I do think collaboration between the U.S. and China has the potential to be useful in the future, but with appropriate safeguards and disclosure and accountability and transparency. I do think, to your other question about how do we keep putting pressure on the system, working with other partners around the world to continue to ask for information about what happened, basically all in animal sampling and the environmental sampling and in the laboratory continues to be very important. The WHO now is in that position, is asking for that information from China. I think the Director General even a month ago said all hypotheses remain on the table. China needs to provide more additional information. And to Dr. George's last point, I completely agree that China has a strategy of acquiring genomic information from around the world, including in the U.S., but has laws against other countries acquiring genomic information from within China. And so I think we should all be playing in a level playing field and be much more aware of where our information in the bioeconomy and personal information is going, in particular to China, but to other countries.
Thank you. Dr. Howard, as quickly as you can.
Our work was not designed to look at the resources being expended on particular research.
Thank you. I yield.